everyone. I'm Jennifer Purcell with Spark Flash Fiction, and I am here tonight to talk with Carrie Weston, who is the author of Love Bob from our latest issue. So before we begin, let me go ahead and introduce her just in case you haven't met her yet. Carrie L. Weston is an author with Sunrise Publishing and professor living in the Twin Cities area. She is wife to Jim, mom to 5 wonderful kids. She holds an MFA in creative writing and an MA in strategic communication management. She is interested in telling the stories of small communities of people and of the importance of setting as a character in fiction. So now let's go ahead, Carrie, and jump into the inspiration behind your story, Love Bob. So what inspired you to write that particular story?
Well, I was scrolling social media, and of course, I get one of those reels that has the dogs with the little communication buttons, and they were pushing them and like saying stuff, and a few of them were saying things like, love mom, and then the person would push the button back and say, like I love whatever the dog's name was at the time, and I was like, oh, that's really cute, but like, what if like then that dog was able to reveal something that was like a secret, or that like mom ate junk food a bunch of day, or that the kids like did something naughty or something like that. So that kind of stuck with me. And one thing that I do is I have like a file of saved things from Facebook and Instagram where I save like random story ideas. And that was one that had been stuck, in there, and I kept thinking about it. And so then when I saw the theme for this fall issue, it was like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. Like that would be such a cute way for somebody to reveal that they were interested in somebody else by having their pet, literally do it. When it said, have them be the matchmaker, it's like, well, what if they just said, hey, look, this is what's going on?
I love that. I love that so much. So, did you do a lot of research into how this works, or were you basing it basically off of some of these reels that you got to see with your own eyes?
I was basing them off of the reels, and then I did do a little bit of reading of like the companies that make them. You can find them if you want to start doing it with your pet, which I think would be interesting. But it'd also be, I think, a commitment, because then they could ask you, like sometimes you'll see like the dogs asking for treats all the time. And so, if you had a dog that got really stuck on something, maybe you'd want that button to just kind of disappear one night or something. Uh, but yeah, it's interesting, like these things that are out there, and then there's like they have like thousands and thousands of followers for these dogs just talking. It's certainly a good a good way to get you to want to do it more if your dog has like 40,000 followers.
Yeah, I know I personally get interested in this one account. I can't even remember the name, but they just dress their dog up in sweaters and like show them in sweaters and like add like a little voice like the dog is saying stuff. And I don't know why that's so entertaining, but it just is.
And that's where social media gets us.
Yeah. But okay, so let's go back to romance in the real world a little bit. But so this story that you wrote was contemporary romance. So do you prefer contemporary romance, or is there another subgenre that you like a lot?
I really like timeline. For my thesis for my MFA, it's dual timeline. And then one area of the world that I'm very interested in is Door County, Wisconsin, which is, they would say, let me see how I can do this best. They would say this is the thumb of Wisconsin. But as a former Michigander, I grew up there. I'd say, no, it's not a thumb. It would be a pinky. But Door County is just this little slip of land off there. And so I do a lot of writing and a lot of research. My family goes there a lot. And so I do dual timeline. And so my son and I got to do some research on a shipwreck that's in my thesis. We got to take like a shipwreck kayak tour and do like some underwater photography of the remains of the shipwreck. And so I think that's just why I really fall in love with that there, and that richness that history can provide in stories. But I feel like like I love to write that side of things, but there's certainly other areas where I love to read them, but it's not necessarily where then I enjoy writing it as much. Like some of like the contemporary rom-coms, like I enjoy those a lot, but that's not necessarily my area of giftedness as far as writing, even though I'd say like my story certainly has humor in this issue, but it's not necessarily rom-commy itself.
Yeah. I know sometimes that's the hardest thing about an author is realizing that just because you love a genre doesn't necessarily mean you should write said
Mm-hmm.
genre, which to me is why flash fiction is so fun because it's just like 1,000 words. And so you can just, write a little bit and experiment and maybe even get it out of your system. And then you go on to longer work. And then when you get another itch, then you just come back and write another short story.
Oh, definitely. And I think we were chatting before. I wrote this story like just after I turned in a draft of my book, and then it was like I need to exercise it completely,
Hmm.
and the speed certainly of it, and then also some of the tone of it is very different, and so it's fun just to get to do that and be creative and just enjoy doing something different with it. Like I also have written like really dry freelance articles about like the aeronautics industry and about like using AI for pest control and farming and things like that. And so that's like, okay, now I need to go and I need to write something fun like flash fiction, because you can't always go to a whole novel length other thing when you need to, but like writing something that's briefer is just like a little like a breath of fresh air getting to do it, and get it done, maybe the rough draft like in a day, if you're really working on it, or just even to be able to have that the end, which I know we've all started a lot of projects where we never see the end, because life interferes, and so being able just to like get it complete is very satisfying.
I agree. And I know sometimes I even like to just write a story because I'm itching to write a certain trope that does not fit my current work in progress. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's another reason I love flash fiction. So to jump off of that, like what is your favorite romance trope? Not only to write, but also to read, because sometimes for me it's a little bit different. So I don't know if that's the same with you.
I think so. I really enjoy, um, say, like Friends to More, that sort of thing, because I think also like when you're entering into the story, then you really believe like these people actually do like each other and would want to have a happily ever after with each other. Where like, yes, I love to watch like a good, enemies, with each other. The banter is obviously great, but then sometimes you come away at the end of the story and you're like, okay, but you guys, you would have a really tumultuous life, for the rest of, this time, where, some ways that's fine, but then other ways it's like, okay, maybe, genuinely liking each other and being friends first, is in some ways best. And that's, like my husband and I, our story too. So I think it's kind of dear to me for, um, you know, but when you talk about tropes, like there's just so many that it's hard to pick just one. And I think it, just depends on what you're feeling like at the moment. And I think that's what makes it, nice, is that, like, yeah, it's things that you're expecting and, kind of going into it, what's going to happen, at least in a little bit. But it's like, okay, I want the comfort of kind of knowing what's going to happen. And then somebody still does it in a new and fun kind of way.
Great, because I know that's why I love Hallmark movies, is simply because I know how it will end. And I know people are like, they're so cheesy. I'm like, yeah, but I know at the end they're going to be together and everything's going to be happy and it's going to be hunky dory. But like sometimes I've watched movies that surprise me because they do the same, but they do it in a little bit of a different way. And it's always so nice and refreshing. I'm like, you see, these movies can be nice and different if you'll give them a chance.
Well, and then for the process of FA, we had to read a lot of literary fiction. And that is all very, very good and very high quality and inspiring and creative and wonderful, and things that you should put into your other types of writing. But then also, I would end up like, oh my gosh, I can't read something more, and that's something depressing, and that's something not fun. And so thankfully, like our MFA program, you also got to pick, read a bunch of stuff in your genre, that you're intending to write in, that you would, enjoy and would help you, to think about the writing side of things. Um, and so it's like I would break up some of the heavier, Pulitzer winning things with some of this lighter stuff, just because it was like you can't just read that.
I agree. It's kind of like one time with Netflix, I started watching Criminal Minds, just one episode after another,
Oh,
and that's dark. You can't go down that road. And like I haven't watched Criminal Minds since because
mhm.
I was like, this is not a show to binge watch, and I'm a binge watcher. so I had to finally just like cut it off. But to
Sometimes
go down,
made during time, so like it's not it is really kind of twist your mind when then you leave the house and it's like, okay, where are all the serial killers out here? It's like, okay, let me watch a Hallmark movie or something now.
yeah, like and originally, like you said, when it was released, you had a week to kind of like recuperate
Mhm.
instead of like 2 seconds before the next one would come onto your screen. But to speak of happier and less heavy things, tell us a little bit about your book coming out with Sunrise Publishing, because just the name Sunrise kind of makes me happy. So tell us about what you had to do to get in with Sunrise, and then tell us a little bit about the book that you have.
Okay, well, um, Sunrise is author Susan May Warren and Lindsay Harrell, their publishing house. And what they do is they partner very well established authors who are best selling authors with new and upcoming writers. And so there's like a whole audition process that you go through where it's like a blind audition where first you submit something that you've written, and then you, if you're selected to go forward, then you submit kind of more of like your first chapter and your idea and what the concept is for it. And I think also, I think I misspoke. I think you do need to put, the concept in the original thing too a little bit. But it's been just such an interesting process. My lead author is Rachel Hawk, who's, like best-selling. She has, a movie from one of her books as well. And so it's been a really great process because we get to partner with her and we, submit like our chapter outlines, we submit drafts of what we've written, and then we get, input back from her. We send things to, to Susan May Warren. And so it's, so intimidating to have them look at this stuff that's really essentially a rough draft of what we've written, but then to get their feedback and incorporate it into what we've written is tremendous. And then we also have like a private network of all of what I am, which is a draft author, and then also the lead authors. And so we have like Ronnie Kendig, Trisha Goyer, Terry Ferris is in there. Let me see who else. And then this season is our 10th season is Lacey Williams, which they're still accepting for a little bit longer, people who are auditioning for the first round of that, which I think is a really fun, author to get to write with that. And so then, we'll have, great support for each other, lots of sending of gifts, lots of jokes about things and discussions about our life, but also it's just great to see the, like how they do their process and to learn from, from all of them. So it's been really great with that. And then my book will be coming out next year. It's Christmas themed. It's called Christmas Shop. And so it goes along with the other authors that are in my season who have been just an amazing, amazing part of this. It's actually, there are three of us who are Carrie, Carrie. So there's Carrie V, Carrie P, and then I'm Carrie W, and then Mandy is the only one of us that's not a Carrie in our season. And so two of the books have come out, and then two of us are coming out next year. And it's just, they have been amazing. We do like regular Zoom meetings with each other, which has been great. We discuss, writing process as well as talking about, all that stuff like platform and, all of those things. And then just share, support like, I'm a terrible writer. What should I do? And they, will give great support back and encouragement. And so they're probably, my favorite part of, of the whole process. And it's been great, like to support each other, not just with Sunrise, but also with, all, everything for our writing life.
So can you tell us kind of the premise of your Christmas book, or is it kind of under wraps right now?
Well, it's two people who come to Rachel's story world of Harts Bend, Tennessee, and they're both starting a Christmas store in basically a derelict train station that has been disused and kind of hidden away in the corner of of Harts Bend. And so then there's going to be some cameos from people that are from Mandy and Carrie P's books that have already come out, and then as well as some other people from that world that you might know if you've read any of any of her books previously. And so it's really fun to get to play around, but it's also intimidating because obviously there's a lot of fans of the individuals that then you're trying to portray in fiction, and you didn't create them. So if you get something wrong, then they're gonna kind of take it personally if you don't handle the characters they love with with care. But, we have, a lot of information, and obviously Rachel's there for us to, kind of guide us. And we have a map so that we know that we're putting, the streets in the right place, because she's obviously had it, in her head this whole time of where things are. But if you look at the first two books, that's kind of where then, where now we have a map that's actually drawn out of the town.
Gotcha. So tell me a little bit about your writing process. Like I know working with Sunrise and all these check-ins that you have to do might influence that a little bit, but for the most part, what does your process look like?
I have always been a pantser in the past. And I think I had this idea, as a, middle school and high school female writer of like, oh, this creative process that I'm going to do and all this. But what that resulted for me was not a lot of completed things as much as I would like to have them, solidly done and finished. And so then through the MFA, obviously needing to complete things for that, for the creative writing classes, and then for this needing to turn things in, then I've kind of had to do a lot more with, with outlining and looking at things. And so I found that, even though like I won't necessarily do strictly, exactly what I have had to do because I won't have a lead author, in other writing that I'm doing, that the process has really changed now where it's like I want to at least know, and have a more strict act, guideline for it. And then looking at like the motivation behind what they're doing. Like I think it's been, very good for me too to have both that MFA side where it's talking about this creativity and looking at and plumbing the depths of what you're writing for, sensory details and creativity and giving stuff, but then also learning from these other authors who it's like, oh yeah, I've written 50 books. It's like, oh, that's really like, okay, tell me what you do then. I need to know, how you're getting from, the beginning to the end of it. And so I think that's where now that so I'm writing for Sunrise and doing that, but then also looking at my thesis from the creative writing MFA and looking at working on that and making it better and making it so that it is, a little bit more a little less literary, I'd say, and a little bit more, genre appealing to people. And so I think that's right now where I'm at and where, like I'm looking to grow. And I think that's why like it's been so fun, to get to do some more things like flash fiction, because that then, like how do you apply those techniques from flash fiction to the novel writing process? And it's like, okay, every word needs to count. And I think that's what is so, appealing to me about it.
So you mentioned like you had this idea in your head when you were in like middle school. So how long have you been writing? Were you writing when you were in middle school?
I'm one of those who, since I learned how to write and how to tell stories, this has been what I've been wanting to do. Like in the summer between first and second grade, a neighbor girl and I were writing a play. And then all of a sudden, she was a little bit older. All of a sudden, she discovered, like, maybe I want to be cool instead, and maybe I want to, like, like do something else. And so I remember, like, I called her up and I was like, wanting to talk to her about this plot point, for this play that we were writing. I think it was about, like, a plane crash and, like, these girls were there and they had to, like, live behind a waterfall for a while. I don't know how we were going to, perform this play with a giant waterfall, but, it was a very creative idea. And so I tried to talk to this girl about it on the phone, and she's like, I don't care about that. And then she just, hung up. And I was like, what do you mean you don't care about it? We're like midway through writing this. And I think that was when I, kind of saw like, okay, this is a little bit different for me than it was, for her with that. I was taking it, in a different way. So, I have for my church now, Christmas Eve service, I did actually get to write a play that was performed, which was nice.
Cool.
Co-write a play that was performed, which was really cool. It's kind of a takeoff on like on Office Space, but Christmas theme. Our church it was an interesting church that we had that was doing that, but it was a lot of fun to get to, to get to kind of fulfill that side of things. And then, I've been writing. My undergrad was in English as well, and so it's always been what I've wanted to do, but life kind of interfered. Like, as you said at the beginning, I'm a mom of 5. Like it's hard. Life is kind of chaos. We've already had, November, 2 different sicknesses run through our kiddos where they've been home for different things.
Mhm.
Some of them have been home for different things. So you gotta do what you can to get it done if you want to actually have it happen. Like my thesis, I wrote partly on my phone with my thumbs because one of my kids would never sleep. And I was like, all right, I've got to get it done if I'm going to graduate. And so I would sit there and like hold her and type with my thumbs. And but it's like, if I want to do this, then I need to take it seriously now, because things are only going to get more complicated with 5 of them around. And they're going to be, some of them are little, some of them are, my oldest is 13. And so there's going to be more activities, more school sports, more plays, more dates, more all of that coming. So I've got to get it down now, I think.
So, do you find like a certain time of the day works best for you? Because I've heard of some moms who will tell me they have to get up at like 4 o'clock because they know at 4 o'clock it's going to be quiet and they can get in their word count. So, have you found a time that works for you?
I will morning sometimes. That doesn't quite work out because I have a 1-year-old and a 5-month-old right now.
Oh,
And so
that's
I
everything.
mornings, but sometimes I'm really tired and I need that. But then other times I will find that works, and then also that late at night, because I'll find myself just scrolling social media and it's like, okay, why am I doing that when I could be doing this? Like, I love to do it. Obviously, this story was inspired by it, but wanting to get it done, I have to kind of do that. Also, I do have to give a shout out. My husband is really good. Like, he will, Saturday mornings, they will go and he'll get coffee for himself. They'll get donuts or something else from the grocery store, and he'll take them all out, in the car and do that. Like right now, they're doing what they do sometimes. They're in the minivan having snacks, driving around. They often look at trains. They love trains, or will, just have them, hate to admit it, like, watching a movie in the van, as we kind of drive around. That's kind of how we get dates these days too, with, the pandemic. Nobody was going to babysit 5 kids during the middle of a pandemic. So, we'd have to just go on a drive and have them, all, in the back of the van there. So, but yeah, so then Saturday mornings, then we'll get me, some writing time, but sometimes it's nice just to get to sit on a Saturday too. But I found with grad school, both times, and then obviously with writing, it's like, okay, I need to be serious about it because it is a whole family thing. And certainly now, like, one of my sons is a writer, and he will send me things in Google Docs that he's written, and he's written like 15,000 word stories that then he wants my input on and wants to see. It's like there's a mashup of SpongeBob and World War II. It's a really interesting concept. He'll do a lot of like historical writing, and things like that. So it's like they're seeing, that I'm writing, and they're seeing that, things are happening. And so I want to honor the fact that, like, the whole family's kind of sacrificing to have me be able to do, this thing that I really want to do, that doesn't necessarily pay the bills, right now, with it. And so I really like that, and they're, excited to see me get to do things. And, if they're worrying about doing their homework, it's like, well, mommy had to do homework, so you guys have to do it too.
Well, I love that they're so supportive. That always warms my heart when I hear about families who really like dive in there to help the writer in their midst to be able to do what they need to do. And I also love that you get a chance to encourage your child to
Mhm.
write. Like, that is just so, I don't know, incredible doesn't seem like the right word, but that's the only thing that I can come up with at this moment. So I'm just gonna roll with it.
Well,
Um,
he's a tremendous kid. My 13-year-old is. He's unique, guy.
those are always the best ones. So you mentioned you have this MFA, you've been working with some of these fantastic authors. So what is the best piece of writing advice that you have received?
See, this is, I think, one, um, because it depends, so much on what you're going through with it. But I guess I've got to go back to the classic. You can't edit a blank page, and that's a hard one. And that's when I teach. I teach communication and writing, and often I'll tell my students at the beginning of a semester, because when I teach composition and things, we're teaching them how to do this process of writing essays or writing papers and getting them done. So I'll tell them, start all of your papers for this class now, because then it's easier to finish than it is to start it, even if it's just your name and then like the first paragraph or a middle paragraph, or you pull one quote from research and put it on there, then you're finishing and you're getting closer to that, instead of looking at it and intimidated by starting it. And the same thing obviously, goes for this, where I have, multiple books in series that are started, because it's like, okay, I know what I want to do and I need to start it, because then hey, it's that much closer to being done.
Yeah. I have to agree that that's always a really good piece of advice because there's something about that blank page with the cursor just sitting there blinking at you that it just feels really like scary.
Well,
Um,
with the lead that I've been working with, like if you hear them talk about how many times they rewrite or how many words that they write to come up with, hey, I write 100,000 word book, but for the entirety of this, I might have written, 400,000 words because it wasn't working and I go back and change it. It's like, okay, all right. I will, go back and hopefully not have to write it that many times, but looking at it, certainly it's something that they have to do too.
I always find that both like overwhelming and inspiring all at the same time
Yes.
because you're like, wow, it's not just me, but at the same time, you're like, I really hope I don't have to write that many words before I get this thing right.
Yeah. Well, and everybody's process is different, certainly.
Yeah, I know one of our Sparky's, Hope Welburn, who's our website manager, she is like full on plotter, so she doesn't even put pen to paper until she's done plotting. And I told her one day, I said, I need you to teach me your ways because I'm a pantser and I cannot tell you how many times I finished a book and realized none of it worked.
Oh,
And I have to go back. And if I could just like figure that out before I start running the story, I would be much better off. And it's been a process because she told me one time, she said, you just have to find the plotting system that works for you because what works for you isn't necessarily what's going to work for me.
hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's always hard finding where you land.
Oh, yeah. I've told, what really successful books were just pants, because I want to believe that I can do it that way and be successful. But then it's like, okay, having, at least like a very loose outline has been really helpful. Yes, I admit it. you know.
And speaking of Susan May Warren, who, is with Sunrise, when I started with Novel Academy, one of the things that just blew my mind and made my writing better was realizing the SEQ and like starting with at least having a basic understanding of my character's flaw and wound and like greatest fear. And I don't know why it took me so long to get a grip on that, but once I did, I was like, this just feels like I should have done this from the beginning.
Mm. That's something that they go through with. They actually have like a retreat for each season at the beginning of it. I missed ours because my due date was smack in the middle of the retreat. So
Oh man.
for my almost 2-year-old, so I missed out on it, and it's one of the things that I'm like, oh. But that baby was was wonderful. But yeah, so they go through that whole process, of doing that, and so and doing that with. So I did it, kind of distance via Zoom, but that whole thing of like, having Susan May Warren and Rachel Hack, like they are great friends, and so having like their mind meld as they're doing it is just kind of like whoa. But then you come away with like all of this great depth to what your story can be, and going in a path that you didn't even realize, but it was there to begin with. Is it's been really amazing and intimidating. I feel like those are the two words that I keep using for that whole thing. But yeah, it just certainly is something good. And so if people want to and they have any interest, Lacey's season I think is open until like November 15, and it's a historical season that she's doing. But certainly we're going to have more more authors coming up. We have had like one sci-fi, and then we've had some historical, some contemporary, some romantic suspense as well, in there. And so it's always interesting to see what people have, coming for upcoming seasons with them.
I highly recommend y'all, if you're interested in something like that, to keep an eye on the Sunrise Publishing page. I think they have a Facebook and an Instagram where they'll like announce stuff like that, and so
Mm-hmm.
that really helps to keep an eye on that. But so we are approaching. Well, no, we aren't approaching. We are at 9:30. And
Mm-hmm.
like the funny thing is, I feel like we've only been talking like 10 minutes. So this has been so much fun, Carrie. And I want to thank you again for joining me tonight to be able to talk with you. And I want to thank everyone watching. And if there's any veterans out there, happy Veterans Day. Happy Friday. I don't know about y'all, but I'm very happy it's Friday. I hope
Mm-hmm.
everyone has a wonderful weekend. And if you have not read Carrie's story yet, you can go to our website, go to our fall 2022 issue, Love Unleashed, and scroll. I think she's at the bottom because why not save a cute Jack Russell Terrier for last? I can already tell it's 9:30 my time. All right. Good night, everyone. Y'all have a great weekend.
Good night.